fresh out of the oven with the baker's dozen. Watch a rapper turn to nothing at the hands of rubbish. A couple crutching with the bass still can't catch us. And it's just my luck that my year of coming up, I still been raising a tear up above. Weak-minded politicking with some pretty women and a dozen to get daddy begging for the plays on Insta. Before you talk all your shit, do your research. Before you get a feature, better change it.
Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. Gonna do something a little bit different today. We got the Clark Kents on. I want to look at the language politicians use. And I want to do it by specifically taking us out of the realm of politics into another great example of this kind of language. I call it hiding in jargon. Basically, the playbook is for someone in a position of power who needs to fool, who needs to distract, who needs to mislead a large group of people, but does not have a leg to stand on in terms of working in those people's interests. In other words, they know what they're trying to do is against the interests of the people they need to get off their back. So what do? They hide in jargon. I love writing sci-fi and fantasy. I love reading sci-fi and fantasy. I love these genres because you can examine real-world issues through a safe lens. It's easier to be objective about them when you put actual issues into a different world, a different context. To that, there are few things more fitting if you want to understand modern American politics than the open gaming license controversy. If you're not a fan of D&D, perfect. The strangeness, then, of this world, the unfamiliarity, will make it easier for you to see what is wrong. Similarly, if you're not a fan of politics, I got good news for you. If you're watching this video because for whatever reason in the algorithm, you're a fan of D&D and it turned up this video, one, now is a great time to get into politics. We need you. And two, this will help anybody that wants to understand hiding in jargon and what that looks like. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to look at a video released by the Lincoln Project. I'm not going to talk over it. We're just going to play the thing. It's 1 minute long. Then, we're going to look at a video by Bonus Action on the open gaming license and an update into that controversy. And finally, after I point out some of the techniques being used with hiding in jargon, we're going to look at that first video again by the Lincoln Project, and I'd like you, with me, to see if you can spot hiding in jargon. So, if you're not already familiar, the OGL controversy in D&D is here's the 15-second summation, is the license that D&D had put out a couple of decades ago that allowed content creators of all sorts to take their product, make minor modifications, and display, make something new with it, essentially. What D&D, also the company Wizards of the Coast, got out of that, they're the people that make D&D, was essentially free advertisement, far and wide. It made, D&D already was the top dog in tabletop RPGs, but it made tabletop RPGs much more popular. It's where you got things like Adventure Zone and Critical Role. It's because of that open gaming license. Well, D&D got more corporate, and they got more greed as a result. And they are trying to push things too far. They're trying to essentially revoke that open gaming license. We're going to go back to that in a moment. First, let's look at this video by the Lincoln Project. Republicans are coming after Social Security, just like they said they were going after abortion, and then they did. And so many people were surprised when they finally went after it, got Roe v. Wade overturned, packed the Supreme Court, through nefarious means, got it overturned. Well, they're coming after Social Security. They want to end that. If you're a young person, you should be concerned because our society has been now based off of the understanding that when you are older, you will have a little bit of guaranteed income. If you're an older person, you should really be concerned about that, because they're not talking about doing this in 20 years and 30 years. They're talking about doing this as soon as possible. Here is the Lincoln Project.
You recently put out an 11-point plan to rescue America. So that would raise taxes on half of Americans and potentially sunset programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
Social Security and Medicare, what we ought to be doing is we ought to turn everything into discretionary spending so it's all evaluated.
Entitlements are going to consume the budget. Medicare and Social Security and other entitlement programs are down to a small fraction of the federal pie to run the discretionary part of government.
You're raising the age of retirement. So that's on the table, you're saying?
People want to work on. I need to give them the city to do it.
All right, so that's the Lincoln Project. Every moment of that was alarming. I would like, after we go over this OGL gaming controversy, I would like us to listen to that again. We're going to pause it, and together we're going to pick out where they are hiding in jargon and what they are really saying. The important thing about this is they make it seem like you have to understand all the complicated terms they're using in order to have an opinion about what they're saying. You don't. It's a rhetorical trick. They are using tricky language to make you feel bad about yourself so you don't question them. That's all it is. Comes down to this. And as we watch this video about the open gaming license, something that, based off my standard audience, presumably you're not following that closely. Good. As we watch this video, I want you to look for rhetorical tricks. Hiding in jargon is when they address an issue that they know is of concern to people, and they use jargon to make what they're going to do about it unclear. That simple. This is bonus action, talking about the open gaming license.
D&D has been losing an insane amount of its fanbase in recent weeks, with harmful leak after harmful leak coming from Wizards of the Coast about planned changes to take money away from hardworking third-party creators, to push a primarily online system full of microtransactions and an expensive $30 highest tier subscription fee.
They're talking about D&D Beyond. Basically, a way to take a thing that you used to pay about $100 once for, buying a stack of books, that you could share infinitely with your friends, switching it to a $30 a month system, so that after 4 months they will have made more than they would have with the old way, and every month after that, just bleeding their fans for more and more.
As well as many more red flags that point to the company moving in a greedy, callous direction. On top of that, the previous responses to these leaks have not denied anything, but instead have been full of potential lies and snarky, passive-aggressive comments.
One reason that we are getting such a great dissection of hiding in jargon from the D&D community is because they're a bunch of nerds. I'm a nerd. I appreciate nerdy tendencies. The number one habit of a nerd is to argue about the details, particularly D&D nerds. It's when you're close fans of something, you do care about the details, the minutia. And it could not be more ill-advised for a company that that publishes a tabletop role-playing game to try to use this hiding in jargon. Get ready for a wonderful takedown.
Till now. For the first time in weeks, it looks like we have an official, sincere, maybe, apology and news of how the company wants to move forward so people will start hitting subscribe on D&D Beyond again. Speaking of hitting subscribe, hit the subscribe button below. So today, Kyle Brink, the executive producer on D&D, a person who actually makes decisions for the game, made a statement on D&D Beyond. Link in the description.
I also will, in the VOD, there will be a link in the description. I have the link to the bonus action video in the description. Initially, I was just going to read the statement, but this guy does such a great job of breaking it down. Let's give the credit where it's due.
Nutshell, Kyle tells us he was a fan of D&D before he was a Wizards employee, and he wants what is best for the game. He wants to help bring everyone the creative joy and lifelong friendships that D&D has given us. He then goes on to say that the past couple of weeks have been very...
Pausing it right there. Starts off flowery language, not addressing the topic. So if you want to start understanding politicians, step 1, flowery language, not addressing the topic, ignore it. Don't waste any of your mental processing power being like, listening closely to the part where they're like, we are all Americans, and we all care about the spirit of the country. All of that is nonsense. Just do this. Don't waste your processing power trying to figure out your mental processing power, trying to figure out what they mean by a nonsense phrase like the spirit of the country. Similarly, what did this guy say here?
And lifelong friendships that D&D
lifelong
has
friendships.
Given us.
Oh, nice. Very cute. Very cute. Nothing to do with the open gaming license.
Past couple of weeks have been very difficult for everyone involved.
Past couple of weeks have been very difficult. Irrelevant. Not talking about the open gaming license. He's trying to humanize himself. He's trying to seem sincere. By the way, this person's an executive producer at Wizards of the Coast. I promise you, behind the scenes, it looks something like this. Hasbro said, Wizards of the Coast, we're getting rid of that old open gaming license. Go kill it. The order got leaked. Hasbro did standard company cover-up. Another leak exposed the fact that they were trying to do the standard Republican cover-up of just waiting for you to forget about it, as in holding off the release of the new open gaming license for a couple of months till something else came in the headlines, and then releasing the new open gaming license, which wouldn't have been very open at all. So again, more flowery jargon here.
And that they won't let things continue this way, which of course they won't.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, perfect. I love the flames. Behind the scenes, they do that. Then they put this this executive producer in charge. And they say, because they're getting hammered. They're bleeding D&D Beyond subscriptions left and right. They put this producer in charge and say, make this right. The one thing that you cannot flip-flop on is that we're killing the old open gaming license.
They're losing so much money and faith, and it's not looking good.
I'm sorry. So just listen for that. That's what you have to listen for. Are they killing the old open gaming license? The only changes they should make would be to write in that they are irrevocable, that it is irrevocable.
For their future.
Only change.
Then he makes an apology, and it's taken him way too long for them to say this, but here it is. In the words of WYCD, we are sorry, we got it wrong. Our language and requirements in the draft OGL were disruptive to creators and not in support of our core goals of protecting and cultivating an inclusive play environment. And
our language was disruptive. So that's meant to be interpreted a couple of ways. Every time you come across a politician or a corporate stooge using language that can be interpreted in multiple ways, it is intentional. It's not a mistake. Which means you must interpret it in the worst way, because that is the correct interpretation. The only reason to use language like that is because the worst interpretation is the real one, and you want to try to trick well-meaning people into thinking, well, maybe it's the other one. You're trying to shave off just a few critics at a time with every sentence like that. So they say the language was disruptive, which could mean the language as we wrote it down would have legally been disruptive. The consequences of the actual wording of the document would have been bad in a court of law. That's the bad way to, that's what would have been bad for creators. The bad interpretation of that sentence is that just the way they phrased the actions they were going to take was disruptive. That's what they want you to not think they're saying. But that's what they're saying. In other words, we're still going to try to F these people, but we're going to use gentler language with how we describe the effing.
Limiting the OGL to TTRPGs. Then we compounded things by being silent for too long, we hurt fans and creators, and more frequent and clear communications could have prevented so much of this.
Remember that silence was not an accident. That silence was an attempt to let the community forget about it. They wrote that down. Internal communications that got leaked. That was their strategy. Their silence was not accidental, it was intentional.
Starting now, we're going to do this a better way, more open and transparent, with our entire community of creators.
Every line. More open and transparent. Seems like something that would be good. Unless we're talking about specifics, it's really not. And do not forget, transparency is often a ruse. You can run a Twitter poll on Twitter if you own the place, and ban everybody who disagrees with you from participating in that poll, so that later you can point to the poll and say, look, I asked the public, they said they wanted to do it my way. What Elon Musk does. Unless you're talking about concrete language that is simple, where you immediately understand what they are saying, not where you have to interpret it. It is designed to fool you. And we're going to go back to the Lincoln Project video soon, but let's let this
time
play
to iterate, to get feedback, to improve. He then goes on to say that they will listen to us. They intend on doing a proper feedback survey situation, all about the OGL, similar to how they handle the Unearthed Arcana and the 1D&D stuff, meaning they'll take surveys and feedback back and hopefully take it seriously. This also means seemingly that they are still planning to go forwards with changes to the OGL, which I think the community won't stand for, full stop. Here's what to expect moving forwards.
Okay, so we're going to go into the here's what to expect portion, certainly. Got some comments that I really appreciate. We changed the OGL until you're SOL, but it's coming ASAP, and if we don't keep it on the DL, there's going to be BM in the SQL. Perfectly put. Perfectly put. Oh, gosh. So, what are we getting from this? All of that. Let's go back to where we have an actual image of the letter up there. All of that was a lot of flowery language to say, we know we got caught. And pretending like we didn't get caught is making us look silly. And so now we're going to try to release a version of this that you are that you're not going to complain about. I linked the video to bonus action. He does go into the details of this new agreement. But suffice it to say, it has within it the same problems that the old one did. Not all the same problems, let me be fair. Not all the same problems. For example, content creators who presently are making things under the OGL, it appears at a glance like they'll be able to keep on doing that, don't have to worry about changes to it. But the main point of contention remains. There's going to be a fundamental change going forward. And the reason I showed you that is because I want you to be aware of that kind of language. It's used in the corporate world, but it's also used in politics all the time. So now that we know what that language sounds like, where they don't answer a question directly, and where they instead use wishy-washy language and technical jargon that they know the average person doesn't understand immediately. In other words, the people they're supposed to be communicating to. When they do that, it is because, very simply, the actual answer is bad. And they don't want to give it. They're not comfortable giving it. So let's listen to that Lincoln Project video again. But this time, we're going to pause it together and break down the language used. Also, got to do a little hit on the Lincoln Project here. They themselves come from the Republican world, where this is the standard way of talking. So even when they're trying to make it have mass appeal, they themselves use bad language here. They're coming for your benefits, Social Security and Medicare. In other words, the guaranteed basic income for the elderly, as well as the guaranteed health care for the elderly.
You recently put out an 11-point plan to rescue America. So that would raise taxes on half of Americans and potentially sunset programs like
Look at that smile. All right, potentially
Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
Okay. He says it's a plan to rescue America. That means nothing. It involves potentially sunsetting Medicare and Medicaid. What does sunsetting mean? It means putting an end date on it. What does potentially means? It means they might. So in part of his plan, which I don't know why you'd do a plan with a might in it, but as part of this guy's plan, he says, to save America, is to put an end date on Social Security and Medicaid. Excuse me. Let me get the exact wording. So raise taxes on half of Americans, as in not the wealthy, and
potentially sunset programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So that guy used very flowery language to say he wants to end Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. His voters are, by and large, an older crowd. They would not like that. But the term sunsetting makes it seem like it's a far-off thing. It's not a far-off thing. They want to get rid of it now.
Social Security and Medicare. What we ought to be doing is we ought to turn everything into discretionary spending.
Okay, again, he's advocating for this in a way that will make his base seem like he's got some sort of a complicated plan. It's not a complicated plan. Discretionary spending means it's not mandatory spending. In other words, they have the option to say, let's just get rid of it. Here he is trying to spin that now into a good thing.
So it's all evaluated.
Seems like it would be good to evaluate Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, right? Be good to evaluate that. The kind of evaluation he's talking about is evaluating whether or not he's going to pull the trigger on this gun that is pointed at this Labrador Retriever puppy. That's not an evaluation we want people making. The answer is no, we don't do that. And yet, he's trying to pitch this to his crowd, and so he uses that language.
Security and Medicare. What we ought to be doing is we ought to turn everything into discretionary spending.
So they have the option to not fund it.
So it's all evaluated.
So every year, every time it comes up for a vote, if there's enough Republicans there, they can kill it. That's what he was saying he wants to do. You don't have to know the individual words. You don't have to know discretionary. You don't have to know what he means by evaluated. All you have to know is he's talking about Social Security, and he's using vague language. That's it. And then you will get to the correct answer. It's like a mathematical equation trick where you don't actually need to know the complex stuff. You can just do the finger counting. It's that simple. If they're being vague about something important, it's because what they want to do, they know you won't like. Plain and simple. Let's listen to Lindsey Graham telling some lies.
Entitlements are going to consume the budget. Medicare and Social Security and other entitlement programs are down to a small fraction of the federal pie to run the discretionary part of government.
So he calls Social Security and Medicare entitlements. You don't have to know what entitlements are. He just used a word for Social Security and Medicare that makes it seem like something Republicans wouldn't like. Ooh, I don't like those entitled. That's intentional. It's very calculated. Oh my God, this is the...
What raising the age of retirement? So that's on the table, you're saying?
Well, you know, if people want to work longer, I think you can give them the incentive to do it.
All right, let's see in the comments. If people want to work longer, maybe give them incentive to do it. What does that mean? Do you know? I'll tell you. It means the same thing twice. He's saying, first of all, the people he's talking about don't exist. Nobody came to him and said, hey, I want to work longer. And Social Security is making that impossible for me. Nobody said that because that's nonsense. If people want to work longer, maybe we ought to give them incentive to do that. Let me rephrase that. If people want to eat, maybe we better make them hungry. Does that make sense? No. If people are saying, first of all, nobody said this, but hypothetically, if people are saying they want to work more, then they don't need to be incentivized to do that. What incentive is he talking about? The incentive he's talking about is removing their Social Security. That's the incentive he's talking about. So he tried to play on American pride. Oh, I'm a hard worker. When really, all he was doing was stereotyping Americans as gullible. That's what he thinks of us, that we're gullible. He thinks he can give that answer in a hallway, and it's not going to come back to bite him. Make it bite him. This is the Republican playbook. This is what they're going after next. Every time they try to get you fired up about trans folks or whatever the brown people are doing, it's so that you're paying attention to that and not your Social Security, which is what they are going after. And when they talk about it in the news, every time they talk about it, they will use language like this. So what do you have to listen for? It's pretty simple. Nonsense. That's it. If they're asked a straight question about this, and they start hiding in jargon, aka using nonsense, then you know what the answer is. The answer is whatever the opposite of what you want to hear. Because they know it. Have you ever heard a Republican, when they briefly do a heel-face turn and they start ragging on their party, the language they use is precise and clear, and they nail them. And they stick the knife and they twist it. It's easy to understand. And they have this look on their face, like they're relieved, like, oh, isn't this fun? I get to just do this. This is easy. Because normally they have to do nonsense. Because normally what they're doing is not to your benefit. They know that, and they know that if you heard it clearly, you wouldn't vote for them. So they live in nonsense and culture wars. And folks, that's the whole show today. Because it's that important. Learn to recognize their nonsense and do not put up with it. As always, there are links in the description if you want to contact your representatives, if your representative is someone that uses this kind of language, for example. But you've already done what you can do right now by watching this video. If you just make it a habit to be looking out for nonsense. Oh, that's an ominous sound. Yeah, if you make it a habit to be looking out for nonsense and you develop an ear for it, you won't have to learn all these insane terms that they use, entitlements and sunsetting and yada, yada, yada. You just have to know when it's a term you don't recognize that you shouldn't have to recognize. And if your politician is using it, start questioning them. By the way, Democrats are not immune from this. Democrats do this all the time. Progressives, much less so. They have the unfair advantage of actually doing what people want. So they get to use plain language most of the time. Be on the lookout for nonsense. It is our worst enemy. It's the main thing used to make us not pay attention to politics. Remember, they're not trying to get you to agree with them. They're trying to get you frustrated and bored. That's what they're trying to do with those answers. So be on the lookout for it. This has been WYC Nonsense Card and Ominous Music indeed. This has been WYCD Wicked. I've been your old pal Jake. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time.